Growing up, I don't think Lent was something I really understood very much. I knew that the color purple was significant. I knew that it seemed to be a time people talked about giving up chocolate or giving up something. I don't think I really became aware of Lent until I think it's probably after my dad died when I was 40. And I realized for the first time in my life what wilderness was about. And the beautiful gift of Lent is that it is a time in the church when it particularly says this is a journey for 40 days that helps us understand that we are not alone, that Jesus has made this journey and wrestled with his purpose and wrestled with who God is and temptation. But as I've become older, I've realized that wilderness is not just a 40-day period once a year. It comes at different times in our lives. And for me, it was the death of my father. A friend before Christmas and the death of his wife after a wonderful life together. But, I remember John saying to me and to our friends as we gathered monthly, he said, now that my wife has died at a far too young age, only in her 60s, I'm entering a period of time that I would like to describe to you as wilderness. I do not know what it's going to be like and how I'm going to get through this, but all I can tell you right now is I'm entering wilderness. I thought that was a very, very helpful understanding of what he was facing after the love of his life had died. I don't know what wilderness has been like for you in your journey, but I do know that it comes in different ways. Coming home to a house now that I do have a dog, but 3 children are no longer there. It's a different kind of wilderness, and there's a little bit of rejoicing. You don't have to clean as much. They've all landed for like 24 hours, and I kind of go, oh my God, it's chaos in our life again. It's like there's an energy to it, and yet you have moments where you really, I hear often people say, whether you have 1 child or 5 kids, there's a time in your life when there's a lot of excitement, a lot of busyness, and then suddenly everything changes very quickly. So it's an interesting journey right now. And I think for Nancy, having a daughter in Kingston and one in Owen Sound, and me at home is kind of tough at times. It's a bit of a wilderness living with me. But quite seriously, one of the hardest wildernesses I ever had to face was to journey with a mother that had always been excited and happy and church-going and music in her life, and the one that always hosted the parties. My mom was always having parties, and usually church friends, but neighbors too. And to see her enter a wilderness I had never witnessed before of depression. And so I want to share with you, not my mom's personal story, but a story that I came across this week of Amy, who's a young woman from Boston, Massachusetts, who's working on her PhD right now. She's married to a fella who is a chef extraordinaire, Nathan. And Amy has been a gifted theologian, as I say, working on her PhD. But she really connected with my soul because she, since a young age, has battled with depression. And so I'd like to let you listen in to what I found so meaningful in helping, as I look back, and my mom's been gone many years now, but at the time when she was battling depression, I felt like I felt so helpless. There was absolutely nothing that, as my sister said, you could always make mom smile. But you know what? When she was battling depression, it was a wilderness I had never encountered. So here's some words from Amy. She said, I've chosen to write about this topic during the Lenten season, depression, because I grew up in a church like many of you, and Lent wasn't taken all that seriously, but I knew other people in other denominations stopped eating chocolate, stopped playing video games. She said, I considered myself pretty lucky as a kid not to have to give up anything, actually. But this year, she said, I find myself in a different position. I've now observed Lent for the past 7 years. And this year, I feel myself craving it. Lent is traditionally a time for Christians to align themselves, of course, with Jesus' 40 days. But Lent, she says, only lasts a season. A person decides when they're going to, give up something. where another kind of wilderness comes along unexpectedly. You have no control over it. And she says, I've been in an unexpected wilderness for the past 4 weeks as my depression has stepped up out of line for no apparent reason, and it's upsetting my routine. Thankfully, this is not my first rodeo of the depression. I know that when depression gets unruly, it's time for me to dive deeper into spiritual disciplines, to call up my counselor, to schedule a session, to do something I love that will soothe my heart and mind, and to double down on healthy practices. I've managed to make the battle look pretty normal by this point. As one friend said, I'm like a duck on a pond, furiously, frantically paddling my feet underwater, while above the water I glide smoothly from place to place. But she says the guilt remains. The exhaustion is overwhelming, and the feelings of loneliness and disorientation are a bit consuming. I kept this hidden battle to myself and a few trusted persons over the past several years, unwilling to ever speak publicly because our society tends to affiliate depression with weakness. Even worse, many Christians have been taught to view depression as almost like some deficient faith or a weak prayer life. Of course, these perspectives on depression are not only wrong, they are damaging. Choosing to keep my depression under wraps was a choice I made in order to protect myself from judgment. However, last semester, I read a book that changed my life and perspective. Called Me by the Light, the private writings of the Saint of Calcutta. This book is a collection of private correspondence of Mother Teresa, some of her trusted spiritual guides. Her letters reveal her own dark night of the soul, very lengthy seasons of sorrow, self-doubt, loneliness, guilt. We venerate her as an exemplary leader who modeled selflessness and devotion in ways that we can barely begin to emulate. And yet, Mother Teresa knew many deep and dark wildernesses. From an academic standpoint, scholars have conducted countless research projects investigating the apparent correlation between leadership and depression. The connection exists, although the cause can be difficult to map. In a season where I wandered the wilderness alone, questioning my capacity to lead, I found Mother Teresa an unexpected solitary from sister to sister, from leader to leader, from Christ follower to Christ follower. I'm thankful for the life preserver of honesty that was cast my way just at the right moment. I could continue to lead and serve and love. My depression does not disqualify me so long as I work to stay healthy, so that I might maintain a healthy relationship with my community. So now, I extend, Amy says, to all of you, indeed all my sisters and brothers in faith who must travel all sorts of wildernesses. This is my Lent. This Lent actually comforts me. I'm reminded in this season that Christ navigated a wilderness not as some incidental setback to his plans, but rather as a season of formation and equipping. The wilderness does not go in vain. The wilderness serves a purpose. The purpose of my wilderness is to simply join you and yours to say that I too struggle. I will get through this depression. The wilderness is not forever, and we will emerge from the wilderness better equipped for whatever God calls to us. That's Amy McLaughlin Sheesby from Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts. What a gifted leader and a person of deep faith. I want to close with this. The Lord works in mysterious ways, but I met somebody over lunch recently who I had never met before, and the only reason I met David is he had a friend that had died, and he came to a funeral that I assisted in. And he was grieving his friend. And so we had the opportunity to You know, it was one of these invitations where we got seated next to each other for a meal. And I'm pretty good with strangers. And I had the angel from heaven that was seated next to me. So as we talked about his friend who had died far too young in his 70s, and he shared his stories, he was able to get really honest with me. It was kind of like a Lenten gift. And David said to me, you know what? I've worked for the BMO. I've been an executive. He'd been in Montreal, Toronto. He's worked in all different places. And he said, you know what? At 75 years of age, though, I found the best job of my life. And I said, well, retirement doesn't sound too far off from me. I said, you're the right man. What is the best job in retirement? And he said, well, you might be surprised by this. But he said, I work at the Hamilton Airport. He said, well, I volunteer. I said, what do you do at the Hamilton Airport? David said, I'm an ambassador. I said, well, we have ambassadors at our church. I said, what do you do at your airport? And he smiled and he said, twice a week for 4 hours. He said, I help people who arrive late for air traffic, for planes, and they're in panic, they're in crisis. And he says, I teach them that we can get them on the plane quickly, and we can send their luggage like a few hours later on another plane. He said, you know, I've been working my whole life. And he said, I get to wear a badge. I get to go anywhere I am in the airport. But he said, most of all, I get to help people who come to the airport because they're excited to leave the country to get out of the cold. People excited to go see family. And he said, most people at the airport are actually quite excited and quite nervous. And so he said, little did I know. I said, how did you get a job like this? David said, I just went on Facebook and they said they needed an ambassador at the airport. And I volunteered. I got trained. And I said, you've given me a really important lesson about retirement or about anything in life, well, no matter what age. And David said, what's that? I said, you have found great meaning and purpose at what you've done. And I said, I'm sure you were great at what you did with the BMO. But I said, there's something about making a difference in everyday, like hands-on. He said, helping people when they're right there in that moment in crisis. And I said, you are a pretty incredible gift. The wilderness is something we'll all have to face. Every once in a while, you take a risk. You take a risk, and you try something new. And you never know quite what might happen.